I stared at my phone in complete disbelief, my mother's words still ringing in my ears. 3 days before my sister Chloe's engagement party, she had just delivered the most crushing blow of my 28 years. "We've decided it's best if you don't attend Saturday. Chloe needs this day to be perfect, and your presence would create unnecessary tension. You understand?" The familiar sting of rejection hit me like a physical blow. Once again, I was being pushed aside for Chloe's comfort, treated like an embarrassment to be hidden away. The line went dead, leaving me in stunned silence. The phone call shouldn't have surprised me. Growing up in our split-level house in suburban Indianapolis, I had always lived in Chloe's shadow, and our parents had made sure I knew exactly where I belonged. While I was the studious daughter who earned every achievement through pure determination and late nights, Chloe was naturally gifted with the kind of effortless charm that made adults melt and peers gravitate toward her like moths to a flame. Our childhood had been a masterclass in favoritism disguised as parental wisdom. When Chloe struggled with math in 4th grade, Mom hired an expensive tutor and praised every small improvement as genius. When I brought home a report card with 5 A's and 1 B+, Dad questioned why I wasn't applying myself harder in that subject. Chloe's bedroom looked like a tornado had hit it. Clothes scattered across every surface. But that was because she's so creative and artistic. My room had to pass military-style inspections, and one misplaced book resulted in lectures about responsibility and respect. Family vacations were planned around Chloe's soccer schedule, her dance recitals, her social commitments. My academic competitions and honor society events were afterthoughts, easily canceled if they conflicted with anything Chloe wanted to do. When I received a full scholarship to Indiana University, the dinner table conversation lasted exactly 3 minutes before shifting to Chloe's upcoming junior prom dress shopping. When Chloe barely passed her driving test on the 3rd attempt, they threw her a celebration dinner at her favorite steakhouse. The breaking point of my childhood came during my senior year of high school. I had just received notification that I'd been accepted into the Dean's List program and offered an additional academic scholarship. Walking into the kitchen to share my news, I overheard my parents on the phone with my Aunt Linda. "Oh, Chloe is definitely our special one," Mom was saying, her voice filled with warmth and pride. "She's got that spark, you know? That natural charisma. Danae is just dependable. She'll be fine wherever she lands because she's a worker bee. But Chloe, she's destined for something extraordinary." I stood frozen in the doorway, my acceptance letter crumpling in my suddenly numb fingers. In that moment, I understood my role in this family with crystalline clarity. I was the support system, the reliable background player whose job was to make everyone else shine brighter. My accomplishments were expected, therefore unremarkable. Chloe's mediocre achievements were celebrated because they represented untapped potential rather than earned success. That night, I learned to expect nothing and demand even less. I stopped sharing good news, stopped seeking approval, stopped believing I deserved the same consideration as my sister. It was easier to accept the scraps of attention than to keep hoping for a seat at the main table. But what my parents never knew was that I had been keeping a mental catalog of Chloe's lies for years. It started small during high school when she claimed to have written a poem that I recognized from an online poetry forum. Then there were the college application essays she submitted under her name that contained suspiciously sophisticated arguments I remembered helping her research. Each fabrication was small enough to dismiss individually, but together they painted a picture that would have shattered my parents' carefully constructed image of their golden daughter. Every time I tried to gently point out discrepancies in Chloe's stories, I was immediately labeled jealous, petty, or vindictive. The family narrative became that Danae was the bitter older sister who couldn't handle Chloe's natural gifts. So I stopped trying to correct the record and started documenting it instead, never knowing that one day this information would become crucial to protecting someone I cared about. The final explosion that led to my exile from family gatherings happened 6 months ago during Thanksgiving dinner. Our extended family had gathered at my parents' house, the dining room packed with aunts, uncles, and cousins who hadn't seen each other since the previous holiday season. The conversation naturally turned to career updates and life achievements. the annual ritual of family bragging that I had learned to endure silently. Chloe commanded the room's attention as she spun elaborate tales about her promotion to senior marketing director at a prestigious Chicago firm called Pinnacle Strategic Solutions. She described her corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, her team of 12 direct reports, and the high-profile clients whose campaigns she personally managed. The family hung on every word, Uncle Robert nodding approvingly and Cousin Sarah asking detailed questions about the marketing industry. As someone who actually worked in marketing, I recognized immediately that something was off about Chloe's descriptions. The campaigns she claimed to have developed sounded familiar, and her explanations of client management processes contained basic errors that no senior director would make. When she started describing her latest project, a comprehensive rebranding initiative for a national restaurant chain, I nearly choked on my cranberry sauce. She was describing, word for word, a campaign that had run during the Super Bowl 2 years earlier, created by a completely different agency. The breaking point came when Aunt Linda asked about Chloe's educational background, and Chloe launched into a detailed story about graduating summa cum laude from Northwestern's prestigious Kellogg School of Management. She described her thesis on consumer behavior analytics, her internship with McKinsey & Company, and the multiple job offers she received upon graduation. The family was suitably impressed, with several relatives mentioning how they wished their own children had such academic drive. I knew for a fact that Chloe had dropped out of college during her junior year after failing 3 consecutive semesters. I had been the one who drove to her campus to help pack her belongings when she finally admitted to our parents that she was academically dismissed. She had never set foot in graduate school, let alone earned any kind of degree from Northwestern. Unable to listen to one more fabricated achievement, I cleared my throat gently. Chloe, I thought Pinnacle Strategic Solutions went out of business last quarter. I actually applied for a position there before I learned they had eliminated their entire marketing department due to budget cuts. The room fell silent except for the soft clinking of silverware against china. Chloe's face flushed crimson as she stammered that I must be thinking of a different company. When I pulled out my phone and showed the table the defunct company's website, complete with a notice about cessation of operations, her stammering intensified. Maybe you're confused about the details, I said as gently as possible, trying to give her an escape route. It's easy to mix up company names in the marketing industry, but Chloe's eyes filled with tears as she pushed back from the table. You always do this to me, Danae. You can't stand that I'm successful, so you try to make me look stupid in front of everyone. I work really hard, and you just want to tear me down because you're jealous. The family immediately rallied around their sobbing princess. Mom's voice was ice cold as she told me that my behavior was cruel and completely inappropriate for a family gathering. Dad demanded that I apologize immediately for embarrassing my sister and disrupting dinner. When I quietly insisted that I was only trying to clarify facts, not cause harm, the temperature in the room dropped to Arctic levels. Danae, you need to leave right now, Mom announced, her voice carrying the authority of a final judgment. This is exactly the kind of behavior we've discussed before. Your sister deserves support, not sabotage. I gathered my coat and purse while 20 pairs of eyes watched in uncomfortable silence. No one asked for my side of the story or questioned why Chloe's narrative had fallen apart under the gentlest scrutiny. As I walked to my car, I heard Dad's voice through the dining room window, reassuring everyone that I had always struggled with jealousy issues and that they shouldn't let my outburst ruin the holiday. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Emma, who worked in human resources for a major consulting firm in Chicago. Hey, I've been thinking about dinner tonight. I know most of the HR directors at the big marketing firms in the city, and I've never heard of anyone named Chloe working at the companies she mentioned. If you want to talk privately sometime, give me a call. Emma's message confirmed what I had suspected but hoped wasn't true. Chloe's lies weren't just small exaggerations or misremembered details. They were carefully constructed fabrications designed to create an entirely fictional version of her life. And somehow, I had become the villain for refusing to participate in the family delusion. The morning of Chloe's engagement party arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that makes Indiana beautiful and Instagram perfect. I woke up in my studio apartment, knowing that 12 miles away, my family was preparing for the celebration I had been forbidden to attend. The venue was the historic Crane Bay Manor, an elegant lakeside estate that cost more for one evening than I made in 3 months. My parents had spared no expense for their precious daughter's moment in the spotlight. I tried to distract myself with weekend chores and catching up on work emails, but social media made avoiding the festivities impossible. My phone buzzed constantly with Instagram stories and Facebook posts from relatives and family friends, each notification a small reminder of my exile. Aunt Linda posted photos of the stunning floral arrangements, white roses, and baby's breath cascading from crystal vases that caught the late afternoon sunlight. Cousin Mark shared a video of the string quartet playing classical music as guests arrived in their cocktail attire. Then came the photos of Chloe herself, absolutely radiant in a flowing champagne-colored dress that complemented her honey blonde hair and brought out the green in her eyes. She looked genuinely happy, her smile brilliant and unguarded as she posed with Brandon in front of the manor's stone fireplace. Brandon, wearing a navy suit that emphasized his tall frame and kind brown eyes, gazed at her with the sort of adoration that belongs in fairy tales. Watching their happiness through a phone screen felt like pressing on a bruise. This should have been one of the most joyful days in our family's history, a celebration of love and new beginnings. Instead, I was experiencing it as a collection of digital breadcrumbs, an outsider looking in on my own sister's life. The hardest part wasn't missing the party itself, but seeing my erasure from the family narrative happen in real time. When Great Aunt Helen posted a group photo of all the family together, the caption made no mention of my absence. When Dad gave his speech welcoming Brandon into the family, someone's video showed him talking about our wonderful daughters without any acknowledgement that one of those daughters was notably missing. Uncle Robert's toast to the beautiful sisters rang hollow when only one sister stood in the spotlight. Comments on the family photos revealed the careful management of my absence. "Where's Danae?" someone asked on Mom's post. "Work commitment," came the vague reply, as if I were some distant acquaintance rather than the missing daughter and sister. "Danae couldn't make it tonight, but she's so happy for Chloe," Dad responded to another inquiry, creating a fiction of my willing participation in my own exclusion. The irony wasn't lost on me that I had been the one to introduce Chloe to Brandon in the first place. They had met at my company's annual summer picnic last year when Chloe had tagged along as my guest. I worked for Morrison Creative, a mid-sized marketing firm that hosted elaborate company events to boost morale and showcase our creative capabilities. Chloe had been between jobs at the time, claiming she was exploring opportunities while living rent-free in our parents' basement. Brandon worked for Technova Solutions, one of our corporate clients, and had attended the picnic as part of the business relationship between our companies. He was the kind of man who quietly commanded respect without demanding attention, intelligent and thoughtful in a way that made people feel heard and valued. When I introduced them at the dessert table, his genuine interest in Chloe's conversation and his complete lack of pretension made him instantly likable. I had encouraged their relationship from the beginning, genuinely happy to see my sister with someone who treated her kindly and seemed to bring out her better qualities. Brandon's steady presence appeared to calm some of Chloe's more chaotic tendencies, and his success in the tech industry meant she didn't have to fabricate achievements to impress him. Or so I had thought at the time. Scrolling through the evening's posts, I noticed something that made me pause and study the photos more carefully. In several candid shots, Brandon's expression seemed strained or confused, particularly during moments when Chloe or her friends were discussing her career accomplishments or graduate school experiences. In one video where Chloe was animatedly telling a story about her latest client project, Brandon's face showed the kind of polite bewilderment that suggests someone trying to process information that doesn't quite add up. There was a photo of Brandon talking to Dad near the bar, both men looking serious despite the celebratory atmosphere around them. Another image captured Brandon listening to one of Chloe's college friends, his brow furrowed in what looked like concentration or concern. Most telling was a candid shot where Brandon stood slightly apart from a group that included Chloe and several relatives, his expression distant and thoughtful rather than joyfully engaged. These weren't the expressions of a man celebrating his future marriage with unqualified happiness. They were the expressions of someone who had questions he couldn't voice and doubts he couldn't shake. Seeing that uncertainty in his face sparked something unexpected in my chest. Hope that maybe I wasn't the only person who had started to see through Chloe's carefully constructed facade. As the evening wound down and the final posts appeared on my timeline, I found myself wondering if Brandon might be the one person brave enough to ask the questions that needed asking. Unlike my parents and extended family, who had too much emotional investment in maintaining the illusion of Chloe's perfection, Brandon had no childhood memories or family loyalty clouding his judgment. He could see the inconsistencies with fresh eyes and an outsider's objectivity. I fell asleep that night with my phone next to my pillow, still scrolling through photos of the celebration I had been deemed too disruptive to attend. But for the first time in months, I felt a tiny seed of hope that the truth might finally have an ally who wasn't afraid of what they might discover. 2 days after the engagement party, I was editing a client presentation at my kitchen table when my phone buzzed with an unexpected text message. The number belonged to Brandon, and seeing his name on my screen made my stomach clench with anxiety. My first assumption was that Chloe had poisoned him against me, painting me as the jealous sister who couldn't handle her success and happiness. "Hey Danae, I hope this isn't too forward, but could we grab coffee sometime this week? I have some questions about Saturday night, and I'd really appreciate your perspective. Let me know if you're free." The message was carefully worded, polite but direct, with an undertone that suggested he was seeking answers rather than delivering accusations. I stared at the text for several minutes, trying to decode the subtext and prepare myself for what might be coming. Perhaps Chloe had sent him to extract an apology or secure some kind of family peace treaty. Maybe he wanted to understand my absence so he could help mediate between his fiancé and her supposedly difficult sister. After debating for an hour, I responded that I could meet him Wednesday afternoon at Grindstone Coffee, a quiet cafe downtown that would give us privacy for whatever conversation he had in mind. His immediate reply thanked me and confirmed the time, adding that he was looking forward to talking with me. The warmth in his response eased some of my anxiety, but not the underlying dread about what truths might emerge from our meeting. Wednesday afternoon arrived gray and drizzly, typical October weather that matched my uncertain mood. I arrived at Grindstone 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table that would allow for confidential conversation while giving me a clear view of the entrance. The cafe was nearly empty except for a few students with laptops and an elderly man reading a newspaper, perfect for a discussion that might venture into sensitive territory. Brandon walked through the door exactly on time, scanning the room until he spotted me. He looked tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix, with shadows under his brown eyes and a tension in his shoulders that suggested he was carrying some heavy thoughts. His usual confident posture seemed deflated, and his typically ready smile appeared forced as he approached my table. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, settling into the chair across from me and immediately wrapping his hands around his coffee cup as if seeking warmth. "I know this might seem strange, and I hope I'm not putting you in an awkward position." "It's fine," I assured him, though my heart was beating fast enough to power a small city. "What's on your mind?" Brandon took a deep breath and looked directly at me with the kind of earnest intensity that made him so likable. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, even if the answer is uncomfortable. What really happened between you and your family? Why weren't you at the engagement party?" The question hung between us like a bridge I could either cross or avoid. Everything in my family conditioning told me to deflect, to protect Chloe, to maintain the fiction that I was just the difficult sister who couldn't handle family gatherings. But looking at Brandon's troubled face, I realized that my loyalty should be to the truth, not to a system that had been failing everyone involved. "The official story is that I have work commitments and couldn't make it," I said carefully. "The real story is that my parents uninvited me because they were afraid I would embarrass Chloe again." Brandon's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Embarrass her how? What happened before?" I found myself telling him about the Thanksgiving disaster, watching his face change as I described the inconsistencies in Chloe's career claims and the family's reaction to my gentle questioning. When I mentioned the defunct marketing company and Chloe's fabricated job title, Brandon's eyes widened with recognition that confirmed my worst suspicions. "The company she claimed to work for," I continued, pulling up my phone to show him the evidence I had collected, Went out of business 3 months before she said they promoted her to senior director. And the campaign she described as her own work was actually created by a different agency 2 years ago. Brandon stared at my phone screen for a long moment, his face cycling through emotions I recognized from my own discovery process: disbelief, disappointment, and a growing sense of betrayal. When he finally looked up, his voice was quiet and strained. "Danae, I've been trying to plan a surprise for Chloe by coordinating with her workplace. I wanted to have flowers delivered on our 1-year anniversary, something romantic and unexpected. But when I called the company she said she works for, they told me no one by her name has ever been employed there." My heart sank as the implications of his words settled between us. "How long have you been trying to reach her office?" 2 weeks, he admitted, running his hands through his dark hair in frustration. "I thought maybe she was using a different name professionally, or working for a subsidiary company, so I tried different variations. Then I started wondering if maybe she had changed jobs and forgotten to update me. But when I asked her about it casually, she gave me the same company name and said she was working on a huge project that was taking all her time." The weight of Brandon's realization was visible in the slump of his shoulders and the defeated expression that replaced his usual optimistic demeanor. I felt genuinely sorry for him, this good man who had fallen in love with a carefully constructed illusion and was now facing the possibility that nothing about his relationship was built on solid ground. "There's more, isn't there?" he asked quietly, and I could hear the reluctance in his voice, as if part of him didn't want to know but understood that ignorance was no longer an option. I nodded slowly, feeling the enormous responsibility of being the person to shatter his world. "Brandon, I think there are things about Chloe that you need to know. But once I tell you, there's no going back to not knowing. Are you sure you want to hear this?" He was quiet for several moments, staring into his coffee cup, as if it held answers to questions he was afraid to ask. When he finally met my eyes, his expression held the kind of determined sadness that comes with accepting that painful truth is better than comfortable fiction. "I need to know," he said simply. "I can't marry someone I don't really know, and I'm starting to realize that maybe I never knew her at all." The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult I had ever participated in, but also one of the most necessary. Sitting in that quiet coffee shop, I methodically dismantled the fictional life that Chloe had constructed, watching Brandon's face as each revelation landed like a physical blow. I started with her educational background, explaining that Chloe had never graduated from any university, let alone earned a graduate degree from Northwestern's Kellogg School. She had been academically dismissed during her junior year at Indiana University after failing to maintain the minimum GPA required to continue her studies. I had been the one to drive to Bloomington and help her pack her belongings when she finally admitted to our parents that she could no longer enroll in classes. She was struggling with depression and anxiety at the time, I explained, wanting to be fair even while exposing the lies. The academic pressure was overwhelming her, and she was skipping classes, missing assignments, basically shutting down completely. Our parents were devastated, but they supported her decision to take time off and figure out what she wanted to do next. Brandon listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly absorbing the information with the grim focus of someone receiving a medical diagnosis. When I described how Chloe had initially told people she was taking a gap year to explore internship opportunities, then gradually transformed that narrative into a story about graduating with honors, his expression grew increasingly troubled. "The job situation is more complicated," I continued, pulling up my phone to show him documentation I had been quietly collecting for months. "Chloe has never held the marketing positions she claims. She's done some freelance work, mostly small projects for local businesses that pay a few $100s at a time. The rest of her income comes from our parents and credit cards." I showed him screenshots of LinkedIn profiles that contradicted her employment claims, company websites that had no record of her existence, and even termination letters from retail positions she had been fired from due to attendance issues or minor theft. The pattern was consistent. Chloe would take entry-level jobs, struggle with the responsibilities or workplace expectations, then quit or be fired before transforming the experience into an elaborate fiction about professional success. "The campaign work she talks about," I said, opening my portfolio on my phone, Those are actually projects I created at Morrison Creative. She's been taking photos from my presentations and claiming them as her own work. Brandon examined the images with the careful attention of someone trying to process information that fundamentally challenged everything he thought he knew. When he recognized the restaurant rebranding campaign that Chloe had described in detail at the engagement party, his face went pale. "She showed me mock-ups of that project," he said quietly. "Told me she had stayed up all night perfecting the color scheme and typography. She was so proud of the client's positive response." "The client loved it," I confirmed. "It won 2 industry awards and helped Morrison Creative secure 3 new contracts. But Chloe had nothing to do with its creation. The most damaging revelation involved Chloe's financial situation and her plans for their future together. I showed Brandon evidence that she was carrying significant credit card debt while maintaining an expensive lifestyle funded primarily by borrowing money from our parents' savings account. She had been using designer clothing rentals and carefully staged social media posts to create an illusion of prosperity that matched her fabricated career success. "Brandon, has she been asking you about your financial situation? Your savings accounts? Your salary? Anything like that?" His expression shifted from confusion to something approaching alarm. "She's been pushing for us to combine our bank accounts after the wedding. She said it would be more romantic and practical to share everything. And she's been asking me to co-sign for a loan to cover wedding expenses that her parents can't afford." "What kind of wedding expenses?" "The venue, the caterer, her dress, the honeymoon." She showed me estimates that seemed really high, but I figured that's just how much weddings cost these days. The loan application was for $25,000. My stomach dropped as the scope of Chloe's deception became clear. She wasn't just lying about her past accomplishments. She was actively planning to financially exploit the man who loved her. The wedding loan would become Brandon's debt to pay while Chloe continued living beyond her means and avoiding real employment. "There's something else," I said, feeling sick about what I had to tell him next. "I think she might be seeing someone else." Brandon's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. "What do you mean?" I pulled up Chloe's Instagram account and showed him photos from the past 2 months, carefully cropped images that showed her at upscale restaurants and cultural events, always taken from angles that obscured her companion, but revealed enough to suggest she wasn't alone. There were theater tickets purchased in pairs, dinner reservations for 2 at restaurants that Brandon had never been to, and social media check-ins at locations during times when she had told him she was working late or attending mandatory company events. "I started noticing these after the Thanksgiving incident," I admitted. "The timing never made sense with her supposed work schedule, and some of these places are really expensive for someone who claims to be saving money for the wedding." Brandon studied the images with the intensity of a detective examining evidence, occasionally asking questions about timestamps or locations. His hands were shaking slightly as he scrolled through the posts, and I could see him remembering specific evenings when Chloe had claimed to be unavailable due to work obligations. "Who do you think it is?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know for certain, but I have a suspicion it's someone she met through one of her fake networking events. She's been attending industry mixers and professional conferences, pretending to be a successful marketing executive. It would be easy to meet men who are actually successful in those environments." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of Brandon's collapsing world. Everything he had believed about his relationship, his fiancé, and his future had been systematically demolished in the space of an hour. I watched him struggle to process the magnitude of the deception, feeling genuinely sorry for this good man who had become another casualty of my sister's inability to live honestly. "I'm so sorry, Brandon," I said softly. "I know this isn't what you wanted to hear." He looked up at me with eyes that held a mixture of gratitude and devastation. "Thank you for telling me the truth. I know it couldn't have been easy. And I know it puts you in a terrible position with your family. The family dynamics are complicated," I acknowledged. "But you deserve to know who you were planning to marry. No one should have to discover these things after the wedding." Brandon nodded slowly, then asked the question I had been dreading. "What am I supposed to do now?" Brandon's investigation began the next morning with the methodical thoroughness of someone whose entire future depended on uncovering the truth. He contacted Northwestern University's registrar office, confirming that no one named Chloe had ever been enrolled in their graduate programs. He called the human resources departments of every marketing firm Chloe had claimed to work for, discovering that none had any record of her employment. The most damning evidence came when he hired a private investigator to conduct a comprehensive background check. Within 48 hours, the investigator provided documentation of Chloe's actual work history, a series of part-time retail positions, each ending in termination for various policy violations, including chronic tardiness, inappropriate social media use during work hours, and, in one case, stealing merchandise from the employee break room. Armed with this information, Brandon requested a meeting with Chloe at his apartment, telling her they needed to discuss wedding plans and their future together. I wasn't present for that confrontation, but Brandon called me afterward, his voice shaky with exhaustion and disbelief at how the conversation had unfolded. Chloe had initially tried to gaslight him, insisting that the investigation must be flawed and that he was being manipulated by people who were jealous of their happiness. When Brandon presented copies of university records and employment verifications, she claimed that there must be some kind of administrative error or identity confusion. Her desperation escalated as each explanation was systematically debunked by official documentation. The breaking point came when Brandon showed her printouts from my portfolio, proving that the marketing campaigns she had claimed as her own work were actually created by her sister. Faced with undeniable evidence of her plagiarism, Chloe finally broke down and admitted to the lies. But her confession was laced with angry accusations that everyone expected too much from her and that she had felt pressured to compete with my genuine achievements. She blamed you, Brandon told me during his call, his voice heavy with disappointment. She said the family always compared her to you, and that she had to make up stories because she could never measure up to your real accomplishments. Then she said I should understand because I was successful enough to appreciate ambition, even if the details weren't perfectly accurate. The most disturbing revelation came when Brandon confronted Chloe about the financial deception and her plans to use their marriage as a path to economic stability rather than genuine partnership. Her response revealed a level of entitlement and manipulation that shocked even him. She insisted that successful couples shared resources and that her minor debt issues would be easily resolved once they had access to his salary and credit rating. She actually said that her financial problems were temporary setbacks that any loving husband would be happy to help solve, Brandon recounted with amazement. Like the $25,000 in credit card debt was just a small bump in the road that we could handle together. But the final destruction of their relationship came when Brandon presented evidence of Chloe's other romantic relationship. The private investigator had identified her companion as Marcus Webb, a successful commercial real estate developer she had met at a downtown networking event. Marcus believed he was dating a senior marketing director named Chloe, who graduated from Northwestern and worked for a prestigious consulting firm. He had no idea that he was funding elaborate dinner dates with money that came from credit cards and parental loans. Chloe's response to this discovery was a complete emotional breakdown, followed by threats of suicide if Brandon exposed her lies to the family and friends who believed in her fabricated success. Her final manipulation attempt involved claiming that her dishonesty was actually a sign of how much she loved him, that she had created a better version of herself because she wanted to be worthy of his affection and respect. Brandon's decision to involve my parents came from a place of genuine concern for Chloe's mental health and a desire to ensure she received appropriate support during the fallout from their broken engagement. He requested a family meeting at our parents' house, insisting that both Danae and Gary needed to understand the extent of their daughter's deception and the professional help she clearly needed. Mom and Dad's initial reaction was predictable: hostile defensiveness of Chloe, and immediate suspicion that Brandon was being influenced by my supposed jealousy and vindictive nature. Their tune changed dramatically when Brandon presented the same documentation he had shown Chloe, including university records, employment verifications, and financial statements that painted a picture of systematic deception spanning several years. The family meeting that followed was a painful reckoning with years of willful blindness and enabling behavior. Dad's face went ashen when the private investigator's report detailed Chloe's actual employment history and the money she had been taking from their savings account without permission. Mom broke down completely when she realized that the daughter she had been bragging about to friends and relatives was living a completely fictional life. Chloe's desperate attempts to deflect responsibility onto me became increasingly frantic as the evidence mounted. She accused me of orchestrating Brandon's investigation out of jealousy and claimed that the family had created impossible expectations that forced her to lie in self-defense. Her argument that she was the victim of circumstance rather than the architect of her own deception fell apart when Dad discovered that she had forged his signature on several loan applications and credit card authorizations. "You knew," Mom said to me during a break in the confrontation, her voice hollow with shame. "You tried to tell us at Thanksgiving, and we made you the villain instead of listening." The most devastating revelation came when Brandon's investigation uncovered the full scope of Chloe's relationship with Marcus Webb. Phone records showed daily communication between them spanning 4 months, including explicit text messages that made it clear their relationship was both emotional and physical. Hotel receipts and restaurant charges revealed a pattern of expensive dates funded by money that Marcus believed was coming from Chloe's successful marketing career. When confronted with evidence of her infidelity, Chloe's final defense was to claim that her relationship with Marcus was purely professional networking that had been misinterpreted by the private investigator. This excuse crumbled when Brandon played voicemails she had left on Marcus's phone, including one where she discussed their plans for a weekend getaway to Michigan wine country. The engagement was officially ended that evening, with Brandon removing his ring and quietly asking for the return of his grandmother's engagement ring that had been passed down through 3 generations of his family. Chloe's dramatic threats of suicide were met with firm boundaries, and the family's commitment to ensuring she received professional counseling to address both her mental health issues and her compulsive dishonesty. As Brandon gathered his belongings from the house that evening, he stopped to speak with me privately. "I want you to know that none of this is your fault," he said, his voice steady despite the emotional exhaustion written across his face. "You tried to warn people, and you were punished for telling the truth. That's not okay. And I hope your family understands how badly they failed you." His words carried a validation I had been waiting years to receive from someone within my family's orbit. For the first time since the Thanksgiving disaster, I felt like my perspective had been heard and respected rather than dismissed as jealousy or vindictiveness. The aftermath of Brandon's investigation unfolded over the following months like a carefully choreographed dance of accountability and healing. Chloe, stripped of her elaborate fictional identity and forced to confront the wreckage of her deceptions, initially retreated into angry defensiveness before gradually accepting that her behavior required serious professional intervention. She moved back into our parents' basement, but this time under conditions that prioritized honesty and responsibility over comfort and enabling. Mom and Dad, shaken by their role in perpetuating Chloe's lies and my alienation from the family, implemented new rules that required verification of all claims about employment, education, and achievements. Chloe began seeing a therapist twice a week to address the underlying issues that had driven her compulsive dishonesty, including anxiety, depression, and a perfectionism complex that made authentic failure feel impossible to tolerate. The family's reckoning with their treatment of me was perhaps the most emotionally significant outcome of the entire ordeal. Mom called me 3 days after the confrontation with Brandon, her voice thick with tears as she delivered the apology I had never expected to receive. "Danae, I need you to know how sorry I am," she said, her words broken by sobs that sounded like they were coming from somewhere deep and long buried. "We failed you in every way that parents can fail a child. We made you feel invisible and unimportant while celebrating lies and mediocrity. You were the daughter we should have been proud of all along, and instead we punished you for telling the truth." Dad's apology came in person, during a visit to my apartment that marked the first time either parent had seen my living space in over 2 years. He sat at my kitchen table, this man who had always seemed so confident in his judgments, looking smaller and more uncertain than I had ever seen him. "I don't know how to fix what we did to you," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "We got so invested in the idea of Chloe being special that we forgot you were special too. Actually not special. You were real. You were working hard and achieving things honestly, and we treated that like it was less valuable than Chloe's fantasies." The conversation that followed was difficult but necessary, a careful examination of family patterns that had been decades in the making. We discussed the pressure Chloe had felt to live up to an image of effortless perfection, the way my reliability had been taken for granted while her instability had been catered to, and the toxic dynamic that had taught both daughters unhealthy lessons about worth and achievement. "We're going to family therapy," Mom announced during a follow-up phone call. "All four of us. Together and separately. We need to understand how we created this situation and make sure it never happens again." The therapy sessions were emotionally exhausting but ultimately transformative, providing a safe space for us to examine decades of dysfunction and develop healthier ways of relating to each other. Chloe's sessions focused on developing coping strategies for anxiety and perfectionism while building genuine skills and achievements she could feel proud of. My sessions helped me process years of invalidation and develop boundaries that protected my emotional well-being without cutting myself off from family relationships entirely. Brandon's healing process was different, but equally important. The betrayal had shattered his ability to trust his own judgment about people and relationships, leaving him questioning whether he could ever feel secure in romantic partnerships again. We developed an unexpected friendship during this period, meeting for coffee or lunch every few weeks, to process our shared experience and support each other's recovery from Chloe's deception. "I keep wondering what would have happened if I had married her," he confided during one of our conversations. "How long would it have taken for me to discover the truth? How much damage would she have done to my finances, my reputation, my ability to trust anyone?" Our friendship was purely platonic but deeply meaningful, built on mutual respect and the shared understanding of what it meant to prioritize truth over comfort. Brandon eventually began dating other people, including Sarah, a colleague from his company who appreciated his thoughtfulness and integrity. Watching him rebuild his confidence in relationships was genuinely rewarding, a reminder that healing was possible even after profound betrayal. Chloe's transformation was slower and more complicated, marked by setbacks and breakthroughs that reflected the difficulty of rebuilding a life based on authenticity rather than fabrication. She eventually found work as a sales associate at a boutique clothing store, a job that matched her people skills without requiring the kind of advanced credentials she had been pretending to possess. Her therapy helped her develop strategies for managing the anxiety that had driven much of her dishonest behavior, and she began building genuine friendships with people who knew her real history rather than her fictional achievements. "I'm sorry," she said to me during one of our first genuine conversations in years, her voice free of the defensive anger that had characterized our previous interactions. "I'm sorry for lying, for stealing your work, for making you the bad guy when you were trying to protect people from getting hurt. I don't know why I thought I could keep it up forever, or why I thought it was easier than just being honest about who I really was." Her apology was accompanied by concrete actions: returning money she had borrowed from our parents, publicly correcting misinformation she had spread about her achievements, and taking responsibility for the pain her deceptions had caused to Brandon and others who had cared about her. The most satisfying moment of my vindication came 6 months after the engagement party debacle, when I received a promotion to senior marketing director at Morrison Creative. The irony that I had achieved the exact position Chloe had been pretending to hold was not lost on any of us, but the family's response was completely different from their historical pattern. Mom and Dad insisted on taking me to dinner at the nicest restaurant in the city, spending the entire evening asking about my new responsibilities and celebrating my genuine accomplishments with the kind of pride and attention I had never received before. They invited extended family members, including Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert, creating the kind of celebration that should have happened years earlier for any number of my achievements. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart," Dad said during his toast that evening, his voice carrying the warmth and sincerity that had always been reserved for Chloe's fabricated milestones. "You've worked so hard for this, and you deserve every bit of success that comes your way." The evening felt like a healing balm for decades of feeling invisible and undervalued, but more importantly, it demonstrated that our family had learned to recognize and celebrate authenticity over performance. As I sit here now, 1 year after that devastating phone call that excluded me from Chloe's engagement party, I can honestly say that being uninvited was the best thing that ever happened to our family. It forced us to confront patterns of dysfunction that had been decades in the making and created space for genuine healing and growth. Chloe is building a life based on honest self-assessment and realistic goals rather than elaborate fiction. Our parents have learned to value truth and effort over charm and fabrication. Brandon escaped a marriage that would have caused him tremendous financial and emotional damage. And I finally have the family relationships I had always wanted, built on mutual respect and authentic communication rather than enabling and denial. The lesson I've learned from this entire experience is that speaking truth, even when it's unwelcome and painful, is ultimately an act of love for everyone involved. Protecting people from consequences and reality doesn't actually help them grow or heal. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone you care about is refuse to participate in their self-deception, even when that refusal costs you relationships and comfort in the short term. Truth has a way of surfacing eventually, and families that choose favoritism and fiction over fairness and reality end up damaging everyone involved. The courage to speak honestly, even when it makes you unpopular, is the only foundation for relationships that can withstand real scrutiny and provide genuine support during difficult times. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where telling the truth meant risking important relationships, but staying silent meant watching people you care about make decisions based on lies? How did you handle that impossible choice between loyalty and honesty? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more real-life stories about family dynamics and personal growth. Sharing this video helps other people who might be struggling with similar situations find the support and validation they need. Thank you so much for listening to my story, and I hope it encourages you to choose authentic relationships over comfortable illusions, even when that choice requires tremendous courage. Remember that you deserve to be valued for who you really are, not punished for refusing to enable someone else's fiction.